Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Hometown Heroes. I'm Mike Kenichi, and today we are joined by three people who have had a big impact in Derby cross country as well as Derby track and running in general, and we're very excited to have them on. First off, we have Joe Mazzanti. Joe, I want to thank you for coming on today.
Oh, thank you for having us, Mike.
We have Derby Middle School coach Mike Gazzo, and Coach, thank you for coming on.
Sure.
And of course, we have head coach of the high school, both boys and girls, Coach Nick DeLugo. And Coach, I want to thank you for coming on as well.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
You know, guys, it's amazing how far the running program has come in Derby. You know, if you would have told us this in, say, 2001, probably would have thought you were crazy. But you three have been around running pretty much your whole lives. And Joe, I'll start with you. When did a love for running develop for you?
Wow. I would say, I started running a little bit in 6th grade, I think. Ran my first road race in 7th grade. Ran some races back then, just running on my own. There was no running club or middle school team back then. Obviously ran, freshman year in high school. And then it was really, I would say, between freshman and sophomore year, going into sophomore year cross country, that I really started ratcheting it up and really got serious and put in the summer mileage. And ever since then, it's been something that a passion of mine, either running, coaching, being involved in some way.
Right. Let me ask you, back when you were a kid, Derby was really known for its football program. That's what kind of always, set the stage for everything. Did you just want to do running to have something to do after school every day and said, this is a sport I could probably be good at? I mean, did you really develop that love at that point, or was it more, I just want something to do after school?
No, I don't think it was ever a situation where it was just something to do.
Right.
Because it was a lot of pain to go through for just something to do back then. No, it was something that I enjoyed from the outset. And it's something I wanted to be as good as I could be. It's sort of a competitive streak, so it was a sport that I felt comfortable in doing. I played a little league baseball and bitty league basketball, but this was something that I seemed to be able to do pretty well.
Right.
Yeah.
Mike, when would you say your love began? Because I believe you went to Bassick High School between 1977, 1980, around there. Mm-hmm. So when did the love for running start for you?
Probably in the early 60s, I'd say, when I was maybe about 5 years old. Because I remember by the time I was 6, I had run away from home 3 times. And my mother used to chase me, and then one time I ran away and I got stuck in a hole and I didn't come back till the next day.
Oh, wow.
And then later she suggested I start running track. So when I got to high school, I started running track.
Right. Now, did you like any sports as a kid bestides running? I mean, were there any sports that you had a passion for?
Not really. I mean, we play a little bit of football in the street. We play stickball down Seaside Park.
Right.
A little bit of soccer, but nothing organized.
Right. And Nick, it's well known you went to Naugatuck High School, I believe, between 92 and 96, around there. Naugatuck, again, we talk about Derby. Naugatuck has always been known for its football, so sports like running, baseball, sometimes they kind of take a back seat. When did you start to love running? I mean, did you guys have a running program when you were a kid?
No, there wasn't any sort of a running program that I was aware of growing up. When I was a sophomore in high school, my history teacher, oddly enough, it's always a history teacher involved in running somehow.
Right.
My history teacher had suggested that I run because he had heard that I was a good runner.
Oh, so you didn't even run freshman year? Huh?
No. You hear about those things. I played soccer my freshman year. Naugatuck's got good programs pretty much.
Right, around the board.
It's well-rounded around the board.
Right.
But I played soccer my freshman year, and I just remember, in gym class, we'd go out and run the mile, and I'd usually be the first one to finish, or right with there was another guy in my class that was a remarkable runner. But my history teacher heard I was a good runner, and he said you should ditch soccer and do cross country. So
Couldn't have made your soccer coach do that.
Well, I mean, I think my soccer coach was okay with it. I was a good soccer player, but I wasn't any sort of a phenom, you know. And I think I saw kind of early on, we had a really big team. Noggy, we were double L at that time. We had a huge team, and I liked how my coach was very competitive based in practice. So, you know, he would show us, you know, who was, you know, after each practice, you know, what group you were in, and it was a goal to try and get up in the next group. So if you thought you were progressing, you know, you actually competed in practice to be with a faster group.
Right.
And each meet, I saw myself getting better as a sophomore, and, you know, he said, I think you can make states top 7, and we had to have had at least 30 or 40 kids on the boys team.
Wow.
Then.
Yeah.
He goes, you can make states as a first-year runner, and that was kind of my goal, and I did it, and I found cross country to be, you know, when I was in high school, something I was just really passionate about. I didn't know anything about it and didn't do anything on the side extra. I wish you guys had been around, but yeah, that's high school.
Right.
That's pretty much where it started.
Right. Mike, let me ask you, was running big in Bassick? I mean, they've had a great basketball program over the years, but was running big back then, or was it still trying to get established?
We had won the MBAC championship in '76, Metropolitan Bridgeport IAC League, that don't exist anymore. So running, even though we were winning, it didn't seem to be big. Like the attention was going at football, and the football team wasn't doing as well. And I remember in the yearbook, football got a full page because they had won the Thanksgiving game, and it says like one win to end their 4-year losing record of, I think it was 35 they had lost. Wow. So it was, but football still got the attention over cross country, and we were running 12-2 records, you know, 10-5 records.
Right. And how many kids did you have on the team back then, would you say?
Maybe 20.
20.
20, 22.
Right. Now talk about your freshman year. It's your freshman year. How did you do that first year? Were you satisfied with how you progressed, or did you think you needed to keep working? What did you?
Well, I actually started when I was a sophomore. My mother had suggested it. But I knew I had to keep working because my first 3 races I came in not only last, I came in dead last.
Wow.
And dead last being, you know, you're not right behind the last place guy. There's a gap, and then there's the last place guy. So my first race, the coach put me into 880, and I said to myself, you know, 2 laps, that's going to be simple. And before I knew it, lap number 1 was over with. I'm in last place, and it's not getting any better.
Right.
Then the next 2 races he put me in was the mile. And once again, last and dead last.
Did you ever think about quitting during that time? I mean, were you so frustrated that?
No, it didn't really faze me.
Right.
And then the 4th race was at Fairfield Prep, and I remember I beat 3 people. And I said my goal was just to beat 1 person.
Right.
And I beat 3 people, and I was like, oh, wow, did I really beat those people? And they were, yeah, well, you actually beat 5, but 2 of them had dropped out. So I said, wow, I'm on my way up.
It still counts.
It had to be a nice bus ride home for you, huh?
Yeah, I mean.
Now, you did run, well, that was track, obviously, everybody competes, but how did you do cross-country-wise that year? Did you...
Cross country, I didn't run that year. That was I started the end of my sophomore year.
Right.
I ran cross.
So you were still getting used to running. Let me ask you: is there one you prefer over the other? Do you like running track, or do you like running cross country better? Because track, to me, I've always said is, you know, especially anybody could be in track. Like, you know, there's always spots open to make, you know, to cover the meets, but track could be boring sometimes too to run. Where cross country, you know, you're running a course. Did you have one that you preferred over the other?
Well, actually, I was the one that preferred track because you weren't dealing with hills.
Right.
So I take the boring over the hills.
Right. Joe, you ran for a guy who he's been, you know, a legend in Derby in a lot of things. You know, he was the athletic director for several years, and he started the cross country program. Am I correct, or he took it over after like a year? Right.
He in the modern era, the program started in 1966. That was there was a team, I think, around World War II or pre-World War II or something like that. But he took over in 1970.
Right, and of course we're talking about Ken Marcuscio, who to this day is still involved in Derby activities. He still runs a Little League, as far as I know, and he's been a tremendous person for the town of Derby. But talk about your freshman year running for him, and did you enjoy running for him?
Absolutely, and I think most of us who ran for him enjoyed running for him. Kenny was
and he knew nothing about running when he took that program over.
No, he'd never run in high school. But he really put the program on the map, because it was within a couple of years that the team had its first winning season, and then of course we were very successful in the 70s and into the early 80s. But he was a great guy, and I think one of the things that people a lot of people aren't aware. I mean, they know him as the Little League president, they know him as the athletic director or as a teacher, but Kenny put a lot of time and effort into the sport. He did little things to get kids to go out for the team, and to hopefully stay on the team, and the little incentives, little things like Saturday morning we would have orange juice and donuts after practice. We'd get kids out of bed, make sure they were at practice on Saturday morning. We used to have these little paddleball tournaments in the gym with the divider up on the wall, and after practice sometimes. And of course he beat us all, which is why I think he did this. But it was a way to get the kids to keep the interest level. Right. And just a nice guy. I mean, I remember coming home from some meets. We used to stop at McDonald's a lot. And he would literally hand out dollar bills to kids on the way out of the bus, so that they would, at least if they didn't have money, they'd be able to get something, a hamburger, fries, and soda, which was a lot cheaper back then. Yeah. But he was a good guy. But he was also, Mike, he was a nice guy. He had a quiet demeanor. He wasn't yelling, screaming. But he was tough in other ways. I mean, some of the workouts that we did back then were a little crazy. I'll give you one example. For a speed workout my freshman year, we would run from the track, and you'd go up the hill that takes you to the picnic grove area. Right. And then, where the ledge is, where you, if you go straight up, you get to Nutmeg, and it's like this huge steep. Yeah, we went up that. And so it was literally, people talk about taking 3 steps forward and going 2 steps back. That literally happened when you ran up that thing. Right. And so a couple of times I think we had to stop and then try it again, like to get up that hill. And but it was tough. He would make us do some intense workouts, some of the distance workouts. People talk about what I used to make them do. Well, Kenny was tough. I mean, we ran into the hills of Seymour, past Valley Cablevision as well. And let me ask you. I mean, I know when I did track for you, you would never tell us what the workout was going to be. So we always had to wonder, 7th period's coming, what's he got in store for us? Did Kenny ever give you a heads up what you were going to do the next day, or was it basically we got to practice and we found out then? Most of the time it was, that day when you get to practice. Right. Occasionally, he would sort of signal that, tomorrow we're going to be doing this kind of a workout. Most of the time not, though. We'd find out when we got there. Now, Mike mentioned how he struggled early on. He got better as time went on. How would you say you did your first year running, cross country and track? Were you satisfied, or did you think you had a long way to go? I was fair. I think, I was maybe 3rd or 4th runner on the JV team that year. Right. Yeah, I was okay. I mean, I had a little bit more experience coming in than some kids did. And correct me if I'm wrong, Billy Thompson was on your team a couple of those years. Just talk about him a little bit, because, until recently, this past year when Kenny Little won the state title, Derby did not have a state champion since Bill. So talk about Bill and, the success he had. Yeah, I mean, coming in as he was a senior when I was a freshman, Mike, and I had read about him in the paper, heard about him and how good he was, and then to be on the team with this guy, it's we would go to meets.
And he was always humble, I always heard, too. He wasn't, a guy that bragged about it. If you didn't know him, you wouldn't know he was a champion.
Yeah, I mean, he right. And cross-country wasn't a glamour sport, so it wasn't like, we were getting the headlines and so forth. But he was... we would go to meets, and it wasn't a question 95% of the time. It wasn't a question of whether he'd win. I mean, that was sort of almost a foregone conclusion. It was, would he break the course record?
Right.
And he just had a phenomenal senior year where he was undefeated in dual meets his junior and senior year.
Wow.
And his senior year, the only 2 races he lost, he was second in the New Haven County meet and 5th in the state open, won everything else.
Wow.
It was phenomenal. And just in terms of overlap, Mike had actually run against Billy, I think when Bill was a junior. They ran, I wasn't on the team then, but we had a meet at Bassick at Beardsley Park, I believe. And so Mike got a taste of how good this
Would you say you got your best time that day running against him? Or?
No, I wouldn't even say running against him. I would say running well in back of him, as did the rest of my team.
Yeah, as did just about everybody, yeah. And one other thing, Mike, just as a little side note, Nick was, when he was running for Naugatuck, he ran on our course. I was coaching the last couple of years I was coaching in Derby. And we actually have a video clip that of Nick where his coach is yelling out to him in the last 100 yards to pass some kid. And so Nick was familiar with our old course back in the day.
And little did you know back then he'd find his way in Derby.
I knew all along.
It was all part of the plan. It was a 20-year plan, but it's sort of serendipitous how things worked out. We were all there. I'm sure Kenny Marcuscio was probably there that day as well. And Matt Bradshaw. So it was interesting that several future coaches, past, present, and future, were there on one of those days.
Right. Now, one thing that was frustrating for me when it came to running is you'd have that great day where you feel like $1,000,000 and you think it's going to happen every day, and then the next day you could barely get your legs to work the way you want them to. How difficult was that for all of you? And I mean, is it frustrating sometimes? I mean, does it make you not enjoy it sometimes?
Well, cross country and track for that matter, but cross country is a difficult sport physically and psychologically. I mean, you've got to be prepared to handle all kinds of ups and downs. There are going to be days when you're not feeling great. And then there are days when you go into a race and you just don't think you're going to be able to do much, and you end up having maybe one of your best days. So yeah, it's part of the lore, I think, of cross country. There are days you're just not going to feel that great, and some of that's okay during the season, because the goal is to try to peak on time for the state meets.
Right.
So early on, if you're feeling a little sore, or early season meets, and Nick is familiar with this during this past season. I mean, the same kind of thing where early on the kids are going to be a little sore. That's normal, and that's almost a good thing in some ways.
Nick, did you enjoy your first year of running, or I mean, did you have a love for it right then and there, or did you question things?
No, I mean, I enjoyed it. I didn't understand it at all, and I never understood it in high school. And it's not a knock on the coaches or anything like that. It's just I think there wasn't today. There's a lot more resources available to coaches. Like, you can Google something and training plans, and you can come up with 100 different ways to train an athlete. You can watch video interviews. You have all these things that are available to you as a coach now, where 20, 30, 40 years ago, you were going to a library looking for one book that probably had cobwebs on it, or you were going to Walden's bookstore, or you're going somewhere to try and buy a book that might show you something. I mean, running has come a long way, I think, since I was in high school. I didn't develop like a love for running until I was in the military, where I ended up serving with. It was unfortunate, and Mike could probably identify with this, but when you show up at your unit and you know how to run, it's a good thing, because you're not going to have any problem passing your fitness test. But at a couple different duty stations, commanders saw that and said, all right, well, we're going to use you. Because, companies and units can be competitive, and there were lots of competitions. So I got thrown in some of those. And actually, at one of my duty stations, my first sergeant wanted me to try out for our brigade 10-mile team. So the Army runs a 10-miler every year, and our brigade was sending a team. So they had to try out for it. And in prepping for that, I met some people who were like serious runners. And they're telling me all this stuff. I had no idea. And they were like talking to me about running like I knew what I was talking about, because they're like, well, you're a pretty good runner, so you must know. I'm like, no. I have no, what's a speed workout? Like, I didn't know. I remember my coaches saying, you're going to run for this amount of time. You're going to go hard, medium, or easy, and these guys were like, nope, you have to have a pace. You have to have this increase in mileage every week, and there's a training cycle, and everything needs to be periodized. And I was like, wow. So when I started trying to train, like some of these guys were talking about, that's when I noticed myself becoming a way better runner. I remember coming home, one of my co-captains in cross country at Nagy, he was, I want to say he was 4th or 5th at Opens his senior year. I want to say he was top 30 at New England's in cross country. He was a great runner. When I came home from the military and he saw me run, he said, what did they do to you? Like, you're so much better now. And I said, well, I have an idea now of like what I'm doing, and I was enjoying it. And I found that running longer distance, like I thought 4 miles was long, I thought 5 miles was long. When I got into marathoning, that's when I was like, I really love running.
Right.
Because it was something that, there's a lot of gratification you get out of doing something that a lot of people can't do. You know, and you get to find yourself. I'm hyperactive, so those 20-mile runs that I go on, I mean, it does a lot of good for me. As far as I can actually sit still when I get home, right? And there's just something about being out there on the road and proving something to yourself that's where I really developed a love for running. So.
Right. And did you have one you preferred more, cross country or track, or? When
I was in high school, I preferred cross country. As an adult, definitely marathoning. Marathoning I just love it. As a coach, I mean, I prefer coaching track.
Right.
But so it's very weird, kind of going across. There's a lot. I love them all.
Right.
But really, as a coach, track is, it's passion.
Right.
Cross country, I love coaching it, and it's great. But it's definitely the easiest of. It's much easier to coach cross country as opposed to an entire track team. But that's where I kind of fall.
Right. Mike, as you said, you improved that year a lot. You got your times better. Was there one meet throughout your high school career that stands out to you where you said, wow, I really killed it out there today?
No, but I remember one meet that as a senior I got killed in. And I remember that meet because it was, we used to call it the state sectionals.
Right.
And I got lapped in the 2 mile. And I wasn't supposed to get lapped in the 2 mile. I was supposed to, be one of the top people. And I ran like an 11:11, got lapped once, and was worried about getting lapped a second time. So that race always stands out in my mind.
Right. Joe, was there one race that stood out to you when you were in high school that you said, wow, I'll never forget this one?
Wow. Well, certainly I think there was a home meet my senior year that I had a good race in. It was over our home course, which was treacherous, and ran an 18:29 that day.
Wow.
And so I was pretty happy with that. But I do remember the very first race. It was a scrimmage freshman year, and this was at Osbornedale, which was a whole other experience. And it was pouring rain. And when I say raining, Mike, this wasn't a few drizzles. This was the hill from the upper pavilion to the top. We were going up the hill, and the river. It was like a river just coming down. It was incredible, and I do remember that race vividly, just from what happened that day. but no, I mean there were many. I mean there were many great experiences over the course of 4 years, and you know, a lot of great kids on the team back then.
Right. Nick, is there one that stands out to you at all?
I have a funny story.
Sure. Go.
Remember my junior year, my track coach had said, we're getting ready for NBL championships, and it was up in Torrington. And I had been an 800 runner, and you know, I had been winning most of my races in the regular season. I had lost to a couple kids. We had a lot of talent in the league. At the time, we had 4 kids who would end up running Division I track or cross country in the league. So we had some good runners. And remember my coach saying, he used to always call me DeLugo, and it was loud and just grizzly sounding. He used to be an offensive line coach at the school.
Oh, wow.
He was a line coach. So he didn't know a whole lot about running. I was like, DeLugo, I want you to go out there and I want you to give it 100%, right? Go out there and try to win, right? And I'm like, that's great advice, right? So remember before the race, just telling myself, all right, it's the 800's a 2-lap race. I'm going to go out and I'm going to be in first place. This is terrible advice, right? That I gave myself. But not understanding what I'm doing, I'm like, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to show everyone I mean business. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate after 400 meters, and I'm going to be so full of adrenaline that I'm going to win the race. So I go out and I'm in front, and my teammates were going bananas. They're just like, yes. And I get to the 400-meter mark, and I was about 57 seconds, right? Which is pretty fast for an 800 opening leg. And I'm like, all right, I'm doing it. Everyone's cheering. I'm like, here comes the adrenaline. And it kicked in for about 100 meters.
Right.
And I remember taking the corner and getting to the 500-meter mark. There's 300 meters left. And I was expecting there to be this extra, like, lightning bolt that was going to travel through my body and energize me. Instead, the only way I can describe it is the way I describe it to my kids. I felt like a polar bear had climbed on my back. And my 4-second lead dwindled to about, half a second over about 50 meters. I mean, I could barely move my legs. And I went from first to 6th. Didn't run a personal best time. Really upset. I got across the line. My coach went over, and it was very interesting. He said, at least you went for it. I like that. It was, at least you lost with style, and then just kind of walked away. And I remember leaving that meet, like, thinking, like, man, what did I do,
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there's no great moment of glory for me. I was a good runner. I was definitely an above average runner, but I mean, the kids on my team now would destroy me. So I have no on the track, many of them in the cross country arena, but take them past 13 miles, the old man still has something in the tank. So,
Mike, when you got out of college, I know you went to the military too, but when would you say you first wanted to be a coach? I mean, did you coach right away after college? How did it come about?
No, I actually didn't go to college till years later.
Oh, wow.
I did my military career as an enlisted man, and I went at the 10-year point I started going to college. But I was running competitively for the first, I'd say, 6 years. And then I got to this point where I just started getting a series of injury after injury, knee injury, Achilles tendon, one after the other. So I got consultation to go up to Bethesda to see the specialists up there. And I went to see a orthopedic surgeon and a podiatrist, and I saw one in the morning and one in the afternoon, which is almost unheard of, but I got to do it. I made one trip up to Maryland, and at the end of the day, it was like pretty much whatever you were going to do in running, you've already done it, so figure something else out.
Right.
So I said, all right, these doctors are full of it. So I got out there, another road race. I came home here in Waterbury. This was about 1984. Ran a 10K. Got hurt again.
Oh, man.
I said, no, the doctors can't be right. Did another 10K. Got hurt again. I said, all right, the doctors are right. So then I started getting involved in coaching when I was in the Marine Corps by preparing kids for boot camp.
Oh, wow.
Taking them out around Hartford, formation runs, take them out to Bushnell, make them do sprints, all of that type of stuff.
Did you enjoy it? Or?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's easier to watch than it is to do it.
Right. Now, let me ask you, do you do any running now at all on the side, or are your legs just not able to?
My legs are not able, but I run anyway.
Right, so you
And I
still
just-
find a way to get the workout in.
Set the example for the kids.
Right.
Go out, threaten them, tell them how bad I'm going to break them, and then they beat me anyway, and then I'll say, all right, next time. And
Right.
just like I told Nick's girls over there at the sports banquet, I said, Sabrina's, first in the state, and the only reason she was first is because I wasn't running. And they got a good laugh out of that. But I was serious. No, I was really joking with them. They were going to put a wig on me and run me.
Now, Joe, back then, too, I mean, a lot of people in your class started coaching right out of high school. Tommy D'Onofrio would do so. Let me ask you, though, how did it come about for you to be an assistant? Did Coach Marcuscio say, if you have the time, you're more than welcome to come, or did you just want to be there? Did it start off slow?
It's a good question. It just sort of happened. Listen, I was always, even in high school, I was always interested in training methods and going through different philosophies. And
right.
So the interest was even back then. It was a captain, our senior year.
Right.
So I had a sort of a role a little bit in deciding some of the workouts with Coach Marcuscio. And then it was after that I found myself going to some of the practices, in fact, most of the practices after having graduated. And never intended to. It wasn't my intent to come back and coach.
Right.
No. I was going to go to some of the meets, maybe go to occasional practice, and that was going to be about it. But once I was there, I just found myself coming back just
right.
about every day. And so it just sort of evolved until one day, I think Kenny was handing out the result sheets from the race, and he's like, okay, boom, Coach Muzz, and it just sort of happened. And that was really the start of it. It was his last year as a coach, and
right.
So it was a great experience.
Right. Did you enjoy it that year? I mean, you still got to be around it, because I've always said this. It probably takes about 2 or 3 years before you get it out of your system. But when you first graduate high school and you have that one sport that you really love, it's hard to go to games, go to meets, and not be able to perform.
Yeah.
You find yourself missing it. So I'm sure that made it easier by being there every day for you.
It did. In fact, there was a scrimmage that first year first year in college. There was a scrimmage that Derby had, and some of the kids said, "Hey, can Muzz run with us in the scrimmage to sort of pace us?" And Kenny's like, "No, we can't do that."
Right.
A violation of all kinds of things. So yeah, you're right, Mike. There is that sort of, you want to go out there and still run, But coaching allowed me to be part of that, and I enjoyed it very much. They were good kids. We had a good underclassmen group when I was a senior, and I could see even then that there was a potential for a lot of success in their junior and senior years. And that would come the following 2 years, but yeah, absolutely enjoyed it very much. And after that, after the '82 season, I knew, yes, I'll be back. Yeah.
Right. So it was there from the start.
There from the start.
Nick, when would you say you got into coaching? Obviously you've been at Derby for years. Was there ever a stop you made before Derby where you got your coaching started?
No.
So
it's
Derby,
really odd. Kind of along the same lines of Mike, when I became a non-commissioned officer, you get put in charge of physical training on a daily basis. So I when I was in the Army, I loved running,
right.
PT, loved it, and I was big time into running when I was in. So when I got out, I found myself kind of on my own, like a one-man guy, just running and doing my thing. And oddly enough, my wife, Dina, who she, up until this year, she'd been an assistant for me for years with track. She had been an assistant coach for the girls' soccer team for a couple of years, and she came home from practice one day. I was finishing up my degree still, so I was doing a bunch of different things, and she goes, Joe Orzetti told me today that they're going to be restarting the indoor program, and they put the job out, no one applied for it. She goes, why don't you apply? I was like, my wife has a lot of great ideas. Sometimes I accept them and sometimes I don't, and I don't know. I was just like, well, why am I going to go to Derby? Like, we live in Naugatuck and I'm not working there, but the idea was it's kind of a foot in the door. I was getting ready to finish my degree and be certified to teach.
Right.
So I went in and met with Joe, and I'll never forget. I'm pretty close with Joe Orzetti, and he said, now I am, not back then. He goes, you have no experience. He goes, but there's something that I like about you, so I'm going to give you a shot. And that was it. And I found myself coaching a new program with no experience. I felt like there were no prospects either for the team being any good.
Right.
But that's where it kind of started from. So that was 2008, I think it was. So,
what I find fascinating is it sounds like all three of you had no desire to coach when you first got out of high school, and it kind of just happened by accident in some way. And here you are all these years later, you still love it. I mean, I'll ask you this first, Nick. Did you enjoy coaching more or running more, would you say?
Oh, I mean, it's not even close. Like coaching,
right,
far more. Because running I do for me, nobody else. You know what I mean? Like, and I think the kind of people that Mike and Joe are, I've gotten to know them pretty well over the years. I think they all kind of share the same philosophy where, like, we don't coach for ourselves, we coach for others. We want to see the kids do better. We want to see the program get better. We don't do it for personal accolades. We do it to see something grow, and the running that I do on my own for myself is for me. It's private, it's personal. I do share it with my family. Like when I do go out and run marathons, my family will go watch, and it's a fun thing, but that's mine. The coaching is a much bigger thing, and we've had the pleasure of watching kids do some phenomenal things, grow into phenomenal people. So not that kids are plants, but it's kind of like that farmer that goes out and plants the seeds and takes care of them. When you see what you're helping to produce, that you can't really put a price on that,
Right.
And then the kids come back and they tell you in their own ways how much they appreciate, what you did with them and for them. And it feels good knowing, that right there, that's the recognition that I want. Not in front of anybody else. Me and a kid together, knowing, their life was changed for the positive because of what we did. And
right.
So it's not even close for me.
Right. Mike, you kind of alluded to it earlier that, you liked coaching much more than running. Was Derby your first stop as a coach, or did you have another stop before that?
I started coaching when I was in the Marine Corps some 30 plus years ago. I had as a civilian, I had a stop in Virginia where I actually retired, and I coached at that middle school for 6 years. I was one of the founding members of the running club there, and then I came to Derby and continued on.
And what was that like, coaching that running club back then? I mean, back then when you coached it too, they didn't have those feeder programs, like they do now. So what was that like, coaching that middle school team?
I mean, it wasn't bad. We were the feeder program for the high school as well.
Right.
There, it was the kids. After the first couple of workouts, you could see who was going to stick with you and who was not going to stick with you, and who was, because we had 6th, 7th, and 8th grade there, like some middle schools do.
Right. Did you get a good participation? Or?
We had 30 plus kids almost every year.
And you definitely enjoyed it, doing it.
I enjoyed it.
Right. Now, Joe, you became the head coach. You started the girls program, and I think their first year was really 1988, correct? 87, you had a team, but it was still trying to, establish itself.
Right.
And, you had quite success with that girls program, and then you would later coach both. But did you enjoy coaching right away as a head coach, or did you find it a little different than being an assistant?
No, I think it was largely the same.
Right.
You did a lot of the same things, except that now you're responsible for everything that happens, good, bad, and indifferent. But absolutely, I enjoyed it, Mike. And Nick brought up some excellent points. I mean, it's very rewarding when you see the kids able to accomplish things that maybe they never thought they would be able to do, and to overcome adversity and to all of those things. And then at a higher level, when they come back, 10, 20 years down the road, and they tell you, cross country helped me achieve this, and it was because I persevered with this, and so forth. That is the most rewarding thing that you can have as a coach. It's like, okay, it was all worth it, in the end.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely, Nick's absolutely right about that. Oh yeah, I mean, it was great. Now I still remember the day before the first official meet, we had a Housatonic League coaches meeting up at Derby High School, and I was a wreck, the night before, and we were running Berlin against Jimmy Keefe's team,
right?
And so I remember that night. I remember talking to John D. because he was up at the coaches meeting, and we were talking for quite a while and about what was to come. And but he was a good person to bounce it off of because he could relate to all of that, But no, I knew very quickly that it was the right move, and never regretted it since.
Right. And I mentioned tough workouts, and I know a lot of people used to dread the 10 half-mile repeats that you used to do, things like that. Kids always thought you were doing it just to torture them, but you really had a good idea of why this had to be done. You talk about preparing for a cross-country practice, what goes into it.
No, it was just to torture them. We really had no plan. No, it's all designed, Mike. Like you said, it's not like the coach gets up one morning and says, well, I think we'll do this just because I'm in a bad mood or something. What you're doing is you're trying to develop a program where you and it gets a little complicated, but you're basically trying to get them to peak for the end of the season, in our case, the Class S championship. And so each workout and each period of the season is designed to accomplish something. So those workouts, when we would do, the long distance days running up through the hills of Seymour, you would see a lot of that, particularly early in the season, concentrating on endurance. And then as the season goes on, you gradually sort of sharpen, the workouts start to change. So the interval workouts that we would do early in the season would be endurance-based. So they would tend to be longer, shorter rest periods. And then as the season goes on, as you get closer to the state meet, you sharpen, and we would do fewer of them and at a faster pace, and then you taper about a week, 10 days or so before the state meet. So it was all scientific. It wasn't just random, some guy sitting there with a stopwatch trying to torture people. There was a purpose to all of that. So yeah, those workouts, when we were doing those crazy workouts, there was a reason.
Right. So Nick, your first year as a head coach, what was that like for you? I mean, we've seen what you've done in the last several years, but was it growing pains for you that first year? I mean, did you enjoy it, or was it rough?
Well, the indoor team, it was really tough. It was very tough. it was a small group. I wasn't sure really why the kids were there. You know, I had a good running background, and my experiences, you know, in the military, made it so I was ready to coach distance runners. But I had to learn everything because I didn't have an assistant, and I still don't have an indoor track assistant coach. So
wow. And how difficult is that for you?
Oh, it's easy.
Yeah.
Just kidding. It's not. It's there's 15 events in indoor track.
Right.
And they range from, you know, the 55-meter dash to the pole vault. So the thing that I found that first year was, you know, in the Army, you know, the best leaders are those that are credible and those that can, you know, those can say and they can also do. And I felt I struggled that first year because, you know, I'd go to practice with a good plan, and kids would ask me questions, and I'd be like, you know, and I'd be open with them. You know what? I don't know the answer to that, but tomorrow I'm going to show up and I'm going to have the answer.
Right.
So I go home. My wife knows I bought about 4 or 5 different track books. I was watching videos, doing online webinars, you know, online classes, all these things where I was just trying to be a better coach. And at the same point, we just got slaughtered. Like nothing was close. Like we weren't close anywhere.
Right.
Then when the outdoor season came about, I was hired to be the outdoor head coach, and that was tough too. You know, we showed up at meets, and it was hard because I think we were 1-13 or 2-13 that year.
Right.
And the only teams we beat had like 4 or 5 people on it. So, I mean, it was on paper it was a victory, but it wasn't like we beat a real team. And I struggled with that. But as the second year began to open up, we didn't have cross country. So I had a nice break. You know, I had from June until December to prep for the next indoor season. You know, I made sure I was ready for that second season. I'd never coached before, and you know.
Did you enjoy it though that first year? Like, forget about the losing aside. Did you enjoy being there?
It was hit or miss. Like, I'm a very competitive person.
Right.
Okay. So I enjoyed what I was doing with the kids. I did not enjoy like the beatings that we took.
Right.
You know? Like if you guys are all familiar with scoring, I mean, I think we lost one meet. It was like 141-5 or something. Like just disgusting scores that, you know, you look at it and, you know, I remember going home on the bus and being like, I can't, that really is painful for my pride to be part of that. But then understanding, all right, there's a bigger picture, you know, and so I enjoyed it, but it was painful.
Right. Mike, for you, you know, you've been a head coach with this middle school program for a while now. Number one, to get it established wasn't easy, but how tough was your first year, you know, being a head coach? Was it hard, or did you enjoy?
My first year doing cross country, it was rough because we couldn't win. Boys were 0-7, girls were 0-7. And it was just sad. The bus was so quiet going to these meets, and it wasn't like, you know, a question as to whether we're going to beat this team or not. It was a question of how bad were we going to get beaten.
Right.
You know, and I said, we got to turn this around, or I'm going to have to go home. And I told the kids, and one of them specifically was Gabby. I said, stick with me another year. You stick with me. I said, next year's season isn't going to be like this year's season, because if it is, I'll find you a better coach.
Right.
And then next year came around, and we had a winning season.
Right. So you turned it around quickly. You know, Joe, it was kind of the opposite with you, with these guys. Their first years as head coach were disappointing. They were rough. You had a good first year as a coach for a program that just started, and then you had an even better year the next year. So when you did finally have that bad year, was it tough for you after all the winning to go through that, or did you see the big picture that things were going to get better?
Yeah, I mean, you realize you're going to have ups and downs, and there are some years where no matter what you do, you know, it's just not going to happen. You don't have the numbers, or you don't have the caliber of runner.
Is that hard, though, as a coach, to go into a season knowing that you're going to put all this work in and maybe the best is 2 or 3 wins? Is it hard to deal with that?
You know, you'd rather win, but I think what you have to do is look at the bigger picture and know that, okay, you're going to take your lumps maybe this year, and you're going to get. But in the long run, the hope is, the goal is that you're going to be able to put it all together, and at some point, it'll pay off. You know, in our first year, Mike, I mean, it was all new. Obviously, the girls were 5-9 the first year, but that first year was critical, because if we weren't successful,
you don't know if the kids are going to come
back.
Right.
So it was a balance between, you had to work them hard enough to be successful, but at the same time not work them so hard that they would get injured or lose interest. And we were fortunate that we also had some great kids. We had a strong nucleus of 7 runners who were really dedicated. And Sharon Miller, who was our captain, was a great leader that year.
Exactly. Well, gentlemen, it's hard to believe part 1 is wrapped up, and we're just getting started, because part 2 is going to be even better. But I want to thank you all for coming on, and we're going to have a lot of fun in part 2. And folks, that was just a sample, because in part 2, you're going to hear all about these 3 gentlemen and how the cross-country program and running program in general got better and better, including the state championship. For Hometown Heroes, I'm Mike Kenichi saying, good night, everyone.